Okay, great. Thank you everybody for joining us today again for another workshop series. With us, the facilitator today is Ayodele, and he's a very experienced person who has done a lot of CA ships and adjudicating throughout, say, India as well as abroad and globally. I'm pretty sure that his valuable experiences in this particular matter will be very interesting in us in terms of understanding what we are learning and also in terms of explaining a lot of concepts and discussions about different topics. Um, I'm going to hand over to Sam now. Sam, thank you so much for again agreeing to take this session. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kaushik. Okay, so hi everyone. It's nice to be back and continue with this series. Okay, so before we begin, just a few things for people to be aware of. Uh, I've noted the questions that were asked prior to the session. I'll try to answer them in the end. Additionally, the chat is open. Uh, I will encourage that if you type in the chat and I don't, respond, you could just raise a hand. It will just be effective that way. If you have a question to ask at any point, please, I will encourage you to, you know, to ask. But don't unmute because that will just be, distracting for others. Just put it in chat and I will pause at some point to take your question and respond to it. Okay, so today what we're going to be discussing is how to, what are hypothetical motions and how can we debate them. It's like a very simple session, anyways. Might take some time, but not a lot of time. So what are hypothetical motions? The idea is simple, is something you can infer a lot from the wording, which is fictional stuff. It's something that doesn't exist in reality, likely to exist in reality, it might be the case that we presumably have debated something fictional in the past that is real today, but within the context of hypothetical motions, the vast majority of instances are stuff that currently do not exist. They are ideas of fiction, things that are not implementable in the real world. Someone is unmuted. Please, can you mute yourself?
I'll unmute them. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. So, why do people set hypothetical motions? I think that understanding why hypothetical motions are set is very important in knowing what to run, as well as knowing what skills that you need to run them. So the reasons why hypothetical motions are set is like someone has a very fantastic idea, uh, usually a movie, sometimes a book. Sometimes people think about weird stuff, or read too much on AI, and they want to set something fancy on it. And usually the problem with just setting that motion as a this house would, this house release that, this house supports, this house oppose, is that you have to deal with the problem of implementing it in the real world in a way that will break the debate. And what this means, or what we mean by breaking the debate, is that it means that either one side gets to take up a huge burden of feasibility. So that means that they have to prove that the motion actually is implementable, and that would give them too much time, too much work, which means that most likely you have opening government losing the debate, which essentially breaks the debate. But oftentimes as well, this might mean that the entire gut bench is at a disadvantage because the up teams in the round just has to say the motion doesn't work. Or it is the case that implementing the motion would create some unintended consequences. Say, for example, this house would redistribute, this house as a billionaire would redistribute all wealth equally, or something like that. This house as a benevolent dictator would redistribute all wealth equally. The problem with that motion is that, in some way, if you like try to do this, it's going to break the motion because someone is just going to come and say this leads to economic collapse, and you're dead, and the entirety of the gut bench might be dead at that point. So this should bring to your notice that sometimes some of these motions that are set, should be hypothetical in the way that they're set, because not setting them that way would give one side too much advantage, and that would mean that they have to deal with the unintended consequences of the motion, which would mean that the other side is easily winning the debate. Additionally, it just might be the case that they have some moral problem with enforcing them. So, this house would, like, if you wanted to remove the desire, like, if you have a chip, you want to remove the desire for people to, have revenge. The problem here might be the case that it doesn't allow people to engage the core clash of what a world where people don't have the desire for revenge would look like. And also, you might have to deal with the extra clash of, consent. The fact that certain people should be able to consent to this in order for you to do this to them or do this to them in the first place. So That's usually the problem. And that's why you have to make it a this house prefers a world where people don't have the desire to revenge. So that means you isolate that clash of, consent, which a lot of people might discuss if you don't make it a this house prefers a world motion. So that's why the motion is set. And it's very, very important. I've discussed this, there are motions or debates I've been in, where teams are not aware of this. And oftentimes being aware of this, you might know this, but being aware of this might mean that, you get to ask a POI that traps your opening. So they're stuck defending what they're not supposed to defend. And then you get an advantage, in winning the debates. I've done this sometimes, we call it dark arts in debating. So like you ask a POI and then your opening is so focused on, answering that POI, but that POI is in the debates, but you know that it isn't the case because that's not why the CS set the motion. In that way. Examples are on the screen, not limited to this example. So this house prefers a world is usually a hypothetical motion. Assuming there exists technology is usually a hypothetical motion. So this house prefers a world where people cannot lie. This house prefers a world where the desire for revenge doesn't exist. Assuming the technology exists, this house would, transfer your brain or the content of your brain to someone else. Yeah. So what skills do they reward? And this is also important as well. The skills that hypothetical motions reward are usually framing and weighing. So like being able to frame that certain issues in the debate are presumably not important, and also being able to weigh, why certain issues or certain impacts are more important. So being able to understand what issues are important or what clashes are important in a debate is an important skill in hypothetical motions, because oftentimes, some things that you might argue might be symmetric, unimportant. So being able to understand what the most important issues are in the debate, or the tipping point in the debate is a very important skill embedded in the framing, as well as being able to weigh why those issues or why certain impacts in the round are important. These are usually the skills that people want to test. You'll most likely find these motions in like the mid rounds, like round 3 of a 5-round tournament or round 5 of a 9-round tournament. This is not a rule, but this is usually, where you find like trying to anticipate where the CAP would set them, or maybe at the end of the day, it's a fun way for people to, distress and, for them to engage with something that is really cool, not something that's really matter heavy or, knowledge heavy that might make people, stressed. Finally, with this kind of motions, the most important thing that you should also take note of is that it's the sort of debates where you cannot say you don't have an extension. To be very honest, the way these motions are set is that they are set to be as broad as possible. So it's kind of difficult for you to be like, I couldn't think of an extension. But more to that, we're going to cover, the basic ways that you can think of this motion, or, the various ways rather that you can think of this motion and this kind of motions. So what we're going to do, before we move to the next slide, is that we're going to discuss, those various ways with different motions. So in case you have a question, what you can just do is, if you have a question about, a particular motion I discussed under a particular way to discuss this sort of hypothetical motions, then you can, keep it down and ask me later on. So yeah, how do you generate arguments? I think that this was one of the questions that was asked. How do you case build, in a hypothetical motion? This was one of the questions that was asked in the prior to the start of the session. So what you should note is that characterization is a tipping point when it comes to hypothetical debates. It's the most important thing in hypothetical debates, which means that while I said earlier that these motions reward the skills of framing and weighing, the only way that you're able to access those skills is if you characterize properly in the first place. So yeah, let's go into the various ways that you characterize in hypothetical motions, given that we understand what they are. So the first thing is, what would this be used for? Or for example, how would people use this? So there exists a technology, or this house prefers a world where people don't have the desire for revenge, etc. How would people, specifically, what are the purposes in which people would, interact with this debate? Like, what do they want to achieve? What do they want to get out of it? How would people use this? So the motion that we have here, can we get the next slide? Yeah. So Rate Me is a social credit scoring app, allowing users to rate each other based on physical interactions and experiences with the users. These ratings may impact how individuals are perceived and the social services they can access. The motion was this house, I think, would implement Rate Me. Yeah. So what you want to be aware of, what you want to do in prep is to understand what will people use Rate Me for? Like, what would they use it for? Like, if you're using Rate Me, if you're rating someone on the app, um, how would you rate them specifically? What is your intent for rating them? And this is very, very important. The way people use the technology, or how they use it, is very, very crucial in terms of being able to access any other impact in the debate, or most of the impact in the debate. A sample method, for example, on Gov, you could say as a response to the op, because usually the op case is that people would use this in a racist ways, like, um, the way that people perceive others are usually based on, physiological differences, like, the fact that some people think that, inherently, people from particular race are bad, and some people think that people inherently from their own race are good. So like the proximity bias, that means that people rate people badly. So that's how they're going to use this. Um, the way that you can respond to this, in terms of how people use this is, people are much more likely to use the app, within their own environment. So it is the case that, Rate Me is a social, how do you say, a social scoring app. That means that the more people that you interact with are the people who exist in your own surrounding. So if you're a Black person, usually the interactions that you have are people within your family and your community, so that know you, etc. So the volume of the interactions that you have with them is much more likely to outweigh, you interact with someone who is like from a different group. That might mean that you're able to overcome on average negative ratings, but as well, that might mean as well that it's kind of difficult for someone to rate you negatively if you already have a high score. So yeah, the way that people use this, or how this technology is likely to be used, is very, very important in this sort of debate. So this was like a sample way that we did run our case, because we did debate this motion at ANDL last year. So yes, how would people use this technology? Like, how would they use it? How does the usage of this technology manifest in reality? Do people use it based on, the proximity bias that they have? Is that proximity bias, how does it amount to? Does it amount to, people getting high scores or low scores, etc.? But the usage of this technology is very important in terms of arriving at any impact in the debate. So yeah, that's step one. Step two is who has access to this technology. And we get the next slide. So the next step is who has access to this technology, who has access to it, and what does that mean? So it's not just to say who has access to it and stop there, but to explain who has access to it and what does it mean. The reason why this sentence is important is because, if the motion is set as who this house believes that this technology is widely accessible, if the technology is widely accessible, then people cannot come and be making claims about, the fact that there's inequality in the distribution of this technology. So that's why the CAs have isolated that clash. So that means that this is not what we're talking about. So when we're talking about who has access to this technology and what it means, we're not talking about instances where the CAs have clearly, framed out that, this technology is widely accessible. So then you want to use this as a response to someone who is saying that the distribution of this technology is going to be unequal. Obviously, you can do that, but this doesn't really matter, because this is like anyone who is making that argument on up to say that the inaccessibility of this technology is going to lead to inequality is making a poor argument, because the motion already said that the technology widely exists. Okay, so let's use the example on the screen and let's figure out what we're talking about. So transhumanism is a philosophical and social theory that advocates for human ability and characteristic enhancement with the ultimate goal of immortality. Assuming there exists widely spread technology that supports transhumanism, this house, as the Catholic Church, would oppose it. So that's the motion. Um, the motion says that the technology is widely accessible. What does this mean? This means to a large extent, if something is like widely accessible, like a lot of people can, can access this, it means that in some way there is some expectation to use this. That's one thing that people can argue. There is an expectation for people to use this technology. And what you might want to make of this, in terms of an argument on God, is that you want to claim that the Catholic Church should oppose this because, people otherwise wouldn't be making rational choices to opt into this technology, because of the fact that there's a social pressure and social expectation for them to use this technology that is coercive beyond, ordinarily the way that people would value life, etc. So I think that might be the argument that we want to make, so that the Catholic Church opposing this is to serve as some sort of, balance and to what sort of choices that people are able to access beyond the coercive pressure of using this because there's a social expectation to use this. So it might be the case that people use this technology, but they don't use this because they think it's good. They use this so that they don't get, isolated and stigmatized by other members of society. So the burden of, there exists a widely, this technology widely exists isn't to say that, isn't to frame out inequality. That's framed out. That's why they say it's set in motion. The idea here is to explain, what does this mean for how people, would interact with this technology. On opposition as well, you can also discuss the fact that if this technology widely exists, then the benefits that the technology offer is more proximate for people to see in order for them to be able to make this choice. So it's to say that, the material benefits of this technology are not isolated from individuals. So because of the fact that the technology widely exists, maybe this become, the fore of, social conversations, you are able to see people use this technology and the benefit that it offers to them. So that you are able to rationally opt into this based on that benefit that you identify. So yeah, this is like ways that you can oftentimes make the argument and the implication of the argument when, it is the case that the technology widely exists. The converse is also true. So if it is the case that the technology, it might be the case that then you are able to talk about things like inequality, etc. Or also you can make the counter argument for choice, and why people are able to rationally opt to this technology, or why it's sort of easy for you to have, effective regulation against it as well. If it is the case that, not a lot of people can access this, there's some incentive for people to, want to talk about regulating this technology in a way that means that, people who access it, that people who need to access it, or that people can make the claim that the fact that it doesn't exist widely, might be a disadvantage for people who cannot, access this because maybe there might be some sort of social blame on them, or there might be social services that, are not created for them or might isolate them as well. These usually are debates, about designer babies, which are not hypothetical anymore, given that, the rise of, things like reproductive surveillance has made, designer babies not as speculative, hypothetical as we used to think about it. Okay, so that's it about who has access to it and what it essentially does. The next part then is how do people think about it? I think that this is also equally as important, how do people think about the usage of this technology? So I'm going to try and find the motion right now. So yeah, the motion under this heading and how do people use it? Okay, yeah. Okay, what would this be used for? Nope, next one. Okay, next slide. Yeah, okay. How do people think about this? Great. So the next, the motion there is like a motion for PAUDC 2024. Ethan is deeply in love with Mia, and their connection feels genuine and profound. They have shared countless moments, dreams, and aspirations and experiences together, building a relationship based on trust and affection. However, Ethan's world is shaken when he discovers that Mia is not a naturally born person, but a genetically engineered clone. Despite Mia's assurances that her love for him is real and that she has developed her own identity, Ethan must grapple with whether the bond they formed is strong enough to overcome the fact that she was created, not born, and whether it changes the authenticity of their love. The motion was this house as Ethan would continue the romantic relationship with Mia. Okay, so usually the claims that you can make on either side in terms of how people would think about it, I think that in on the Gov is kind of obvious. So what Ethan might struggle with is the relational value of, the love that he has for Mia. If it is the case that other people that you might live with in that society, experience on a day-to-day, are in love with people who, he might consider real, he might consider his relationship as well to be, not very valuable. So it's just in terms of how this individual is likely to think about the choice that they are making, or likely to think about this technology, or likely to think about this motion, likely to internalize it. Secondly, as well, it also might be the case that on the up, you might explain that, when Ethan decides to, break up, which is the counterfactual or the comparative, that he might regret, breaking up with this person, etc. I think that this is like, yeah, this is the claim that we made on the Gulf, yeah, that you might regret breaking up with this person, so that's why you shouldn't break up. So like you might regret it based on the fact that you have previous experiences that are positive and this direction. So breaking up might be bad because at the end of the day, you just get to the point where you're like, why did I break up with this person if everything was good? So that means that the next relationship that you enter, you often grapple with the fact that you are comparing it with this new relationship that you're in, as well as on the up, what I discussed earlier about relational value that you might ascribe to the relationship. Secondly, as well, there was this motion that I said recently at a comp, which was like behind the veil of ignorance. This house prefers to be born, believing that they can single-handedly change the world, over uh, believing that they're a pawn in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, what you could also explain in terms of how people think about the motion on either side. One could argue that the individual on prop, um, radically has great expectations. So like the way that they think, and the way that the motion affects them in terms of their thought process isn't it's in form of the expectations that they set for themselves. So this doesn't approximate to what they experience, but how they interact and their thought process interact specifically, with the emotion. Additionally, on the up as well, people could also, yeah, sorry, on with the person who believes that they're important in the grand scheme of things. You could also argue that the way that they also envision societal structures, the way that they think about those social structures, are like negative, dystopian as well because of the experience that they have, in their life, or the sort of expectations that they set for themselves, or the way that they actually the way that they see every result that they get in their life might be attributed to the fact that it is just a small or minute aspect of a machine. So they're just a cog in a machine, as well as everything that they achieve. So they're not able to get happiness from any experience that they have. Just because of the fact that the way they relate with this experience is that they think everything that they have in their life contributes to something greater than them that they cannot control. So that experience is not meaningful in a specific way. So this is just how people would think about the motion, or how people are likely to think about the technology. This is not about how people experience it. So the experience is a direct effect. The way that you think about it is how do you conceptualize this technology, or how do you conceptualize this motion relative to other factors that might exist in your life as well. So yeah, that is on how people think about it. Next slide. Okay, the next slide pretty much is how do social structures and norms evolve? And this is like pretty much, what people would say is like a breaking point in debates. Like, if someone is just able to tell you that social structures and social norms evolve differently, you might find it's very difficult to grapple with. So all of the stuff I discussed earlier, how people use this, who has access to it, how they think about it are good. But coming from back half, if you don't have something else to say, you could ultimately discuss, how social structures and social norms, evolve differently. Because, for example, it is in this house prefers the word motion. Usually, this is the sort of debates where you're much more likely to find this. In a this house prefers the world motion. Usually, you are having a different world where this motion is ahistorical. So it's historical. So the motion also happens at the start of the world in a different, in a different world setting. So, for example, this house prefers a world without the desire for revenge. The motion isn't, removing people's desire for revenge now. It is a world where at the start of that world, people did not have the desire for revenge. Usually people often make the mistake of, changing the world, the content of the world. So human beings will still be in that world, they would have two eyes and, how do you say, two legs, they wouldn't have four. What you just have to explain is presumably how the motion affects them, and how social structures or how social norms evolve. So yeah, there was this particular motion. This house prefers a world without the desire for revenge. Sorry, this is not the Euros 2021. It was the Euros 2023 motion. I've forgotten what round it was. But I thought that what was very fascinating in this debate was that at back half, to some extent, I don't listen to much to opening half, anyways, because they did focus a lot more on the how people experience, the desire for revenge, and how, it affects them, what they think to be good and what they think to be bad in their day-to-day experiences. But what was fascinating about back half in that debate was, that they discuss reputation and dignity in a way that what is the basis of reputation and dignity in a world where people don't have the desire for revenge? In a world where people have the desire for revenge, does it mean that people's reputation and dignity are attached to revenge? And in a world where people didn't have this desire, what would be, the basis of people's reputation and dignity. How do you get social status? Maybe it is the case that, now in status quo, people don't get, so much benefit, or social status from honor killings. But for a very long time in society, honor killings were very nice, all in some cultures up to today, honor killings is still, considered, something you should do. It's not something that is considered that, you can do, but something that's considered that you should do. So if someone does something bad to you, you're expected to, attack them. You're expected to defend your honor, that sort of thing. So what you can also discuss as well is what sort of media tropes, for example, the in status quo and previously novels like Hamlet or John Wick, those sort of media stuff emphasize on revenge, and are valuable in that particular context. Like you do value those themes or the theme of revenge that is embodied in those sort of media narratives. So it is to say that in a world without the desire for revenge, the social value that is attached to things like books or movies that emphasize on revenge would significantly diminish as well. And this also affects, how society evolves as in this particular direction. Finally, also, you could also talk about, what is the counter value and presumably why it's, better or worse. For example, you could say that if it is the case that there is no desire for revenge, it might mean that you try to rationalize the action that every individual does, which means that social structures approximate to less punishment, because what social structures try to do is oftentimes past the fact that someone hurt you, because people hurt each other on both sides. But it's just that you don't think that you should hurt this person based on the fact that you rationalize that you should forgive them and you rationalize that you shouldn't punish them, which means it's sort of difficult for you to have, evolution in society as well. So this is the way that you want to sort of try and describe how, those social structures evolve. Additionally, if it is the case that you could talk about this on the up, which is that, forgiveness is limiting to the human condition or limiting to how social structures evolve progressively, either in favor of women because we have less patriarchal societies, given the fact that, you feel attacked when someone hurts you, and then you feel you need to take back your dignity, then I mean that social structures evolve faster. On the prop as well, we could also claim that, not in every instance, people might have the desire. And this is where this clash becomes important about social structures, because people may have the desire for revenge, people may not be able to act on that desire. And what might be important is how those social structures that have significant power, how they do evolve and how they do interact with people. What are the norms that exist in that particular society? How do people get value? How do people get status within that particular society as well? So it's to say that, if things like forgiveness and compassion, becomes the norm and people become more empathetic and, less selfish, etc., and that means that social structures improve as well. So beyond this, it's just what value do society adopt? What values do people adopt relative to what other things that people can access? So some people are more stronger and going to be more powerful on both sides of the debate. So you still have people who are strong and people are weak on both sides. And that's why on golf, you'll want to benefit from saying people who are strong will always beat the weak. So every time that the strong beats the weak and the weak has the desire for revenge, they can access it. Maybe what you want to do is to ensure that there's no desire for revenge, so that, if it is the case that the weak feel the need to desire to revenge, the strong don't internalize that they have this sort of need or desire. And that means that they don't have to attack them back, because also revenge is preemptive and, not just reactive. So people also preempt that other people are going to react to them, and that also furthers the need or the desire to exploit them or be more abusive. So if it is to say that in a world where there's no desire for revenge, maybe you might be selfish, but you approximate more to empathy, because that becomes more of the value, as opposed to presumably historically when we favored honor killings and when we favored, things like, how do you say, books that did promote this sort of thing as well, which means that it did integrate deeply into our value and what people considered, to be the most important thing in society, what they should expect from others, which led to further exploitation as well. So yeah, how social structures evolve are a very, very good way to interact with this debate, especially because, one, people on the individual level might interact with it differently, and how social structures evolve relative to this might just be important in explaining whether or not you are able to regulate against this, which systems in society does this improve, or systems in society does this affect negatively, and as well explain the impact on that this at the end of the day. So beyond just how people experience the desire for revenge, you could go beyond this and explain, how social structures interact with this desire, what things to be valued, and how people interact with those things that we value and why those things are good. So yeah, that's one more thing as well. Can we have the next slide? Oh, someone has a question, I guess. Let me see. I guess that the slide will be shared. So yeah, the next slide is how do people experience it? Don't be fooled, guys. This is different from how people think about it. So how you think about something might be relative to other things that exist in your life. How you experience it might be relative to just that thing itself. So if there's a technology that allows people to experience pain, I've forgotten this motion that where criminals are allowed to experience their prison sentence, um, in a matter of seconds. So like you can experience your whole prison life in like just like 10 seconds. So a simple distinction here is that how people think about this might be, deterrence. People might think of this technology and be like, well, I don't want to be like, 20 years time in like 15 seconds. Although this is like a very hard, difficult claim to make in a debate, given that, people don't think that they would get caught when they are engaging in crime. But you might say that this might function as deterrence, in terms of the way that people think about committing crime in the first place, how this interacts with other people's incentives. Or you might explain that, the experience of, a 20-year sentence in 10 seconds is presumably very damaging. So that's not how people think about it, but how people experience, that sort of technology. So yeah, the example on the slide is also the Oxford Ivy 2021 semis. This is like one of the very good debates that I did enjoy. Anyways, because I love the CEO case, even though I love the rest of the debate, but I kind of the CEO case was very cool. So the motion was hyperthymesia is a rare condition that leads people to be able to remember an abnormally large number of their life experiences in vivid detail. This house would prefer to be born with hyperthymesia. Usually in this kind of debates, what opening half will struggle with doing is explaining, why experiencing, like, having a large number of like your life experience in vivid detail on Gov, people might say it's valuable for you. Having more information means that you're able to understand, things to that means that you don't forget things beneficial for you. It's like having that, like, large number of life experiences just improves the amount of power that you have, given that it is the case that you're able to make more informed decisions because you have, more information. So that means that your decisions are more informed, given that the process of forgetting in the first place might just be bad because, we forget stuff based on, certain biological conditions that allows us to, select our memories. Like selective memory might just be bad for individuals in terms of the information that they have and also in terms of the decisions that they make and may not be wholesome. On opposition, you could also claim as well that, selective memory is important because, it allows people to get rid of pain, being able to construct your memory is very, very good for you. So, people would remember stuff that hurt them, but, remembering the intense or vivid detail might just be bad for people and their experience on a day-to-day basis. Good stuff. Maybe I might discuss an open house about how people experience it. But a different way, that you can talk about this from back up is to say that people and the experience here might be in terms of you are the only person that is, this house would prefer to be born with hyperthymesia. Not everyone this is not this house prefers a world where, everyone has hyperthymesia. So this house would prefer to be born with hyperthymesia. What changes is, the individual being born with this condition. And what Theo did carefully argue in that debate is to say that the way that you experience this technology, or the way that you experience this condition rather, is going to mean that your interaction with other people become, weird. If you remember stuff like in vivid detail and other people don't, you're just gonna feel like you're dull. It's like, it's gonna be weird, when you're telling them something that they don't remember. and you expect them to remember. That's the problem, because of the fact that you have this condition, you do have that sort of expectation that people should remember, should be able to remember stuff that happens, on a day-to-day basis as well. And this also affects the way that you interact with people, because of the fact that when you are just having this conversation, you remember stuff in intense or immense detail. This also means that you tell people, when you tell you about this stuff that they have, the selective capacity to forget, it might be valuable for them to forget. When you tell them about this stuff, they also, feel like this person is really weird. How do you remember this stuff? So that might mean that, people interact less with you, because of the fact that, you might remember stuff that might make them sad. You're much more likely to be sad based on, the sort of experiences and memories that you have. People don't want to be, with someone who feels sad and guilty all the time. So they just move away. Or, you can make the claim on that as well, that, if this is the case, and this is also a claim that CEO made in the round, which is that, you do feel that people should be responsible, and that's, they should be able to remember stuff and they don't, which is becomes a problem because you don't feel that they are, very responsible people, and then that harms the extent to which you're able to interact with them. So yes, this is like the how you say this is like the sort of way in which you try to, debate this motion in terms of how people would experience it by asking yourself in prep, what's the motion and how are people going to experience it. I was in some debate this like a few moments ago. So it was the motion I pointed earlier about, this house behind the veil of ignorance, this house as an individual would prefer to, be born believed in that single-handedly they can change the world, as opposed to, that they pawn in the grand scheme of things. So what I was trying to tell them in feedback was like, emotion isn't saying that everyone in that world will be born that way, but like you are born that way, and like not everyone, thinks about, going around that they can change the world. Not everyone thinks that they pawn in the grand scheme of things. How is this motion likely to affect, how you interact with people, what you expect from people to do, or how you, sort of seem weird and different or too overconfident, as someone who single-handedly believes that they can change the world in a way that means that it's kind of difficult for people to talk to you. Or how does this, interact on the converse with someone who believes that they're poor and in the grand scheme of things, they're very sad, and that means that, people don't want to be close to them as well. So yeah, these are the way that people experience it, which is how do they experience specifically that condition? How do they experience specifically that technology? Is it something that they're able to deal with? Is it something that overwhelms them? And this is like also one final way to prep this kind of motions. Before I move to the next slide, do people have any questions about what we've been discussing so far? Any questions? All right, so I will move on to the next slide. And as if people have questions at the end. So yeah, given that we've discussed, all the various stuff, so you can write it down, the various things that you need to characterize in this sort of debate. Usually open teams will not be able to do all five. I think I was 5 or 6. It was 5. So opening will not be able to do all 5, no matter how hard they try. So you're always going to have stuff, at closing. That's always how these motions are expected to be. There are always motions that you can manipulate. But you have to analyze properly. So that's also very important, And what are the problems that people usually have with analyzing these sort of motions? First problem is that they assume more than what is on the info slide. So I think I set a motion some time ago about, this house prefers that, that Christianity did frame, Lucifer doing a job as opposed to serving a punishment. And like a lot of people were discussing the motion. I was like, oh, I've seen the movie. Fair enough, but like not everyone has seen the movie. Like I didn't even see the movie until like 2, 3 years ago. So good job with like relying so much on, sorry, on that's the second part, but relying too much on what's on the info slide. I'm going to discuss, what is the first problem, given I started on that. Yeah. So when it comes to, going beyond more than what is stated on the info slide, it might be the case that that's not what the CAs wanted to set in the first place. So like if you do go beyond what is on the info slide, then you might have a problem. And that might mean that, that might mean as well that if you do debate the motion in this way, for example, I'm a judge usually when I judge tournaments and someone said like a fictional motion. I really don't know because guys, I don't watch a lot of movies. Like if This doesn't mean that you can't use your knowledge, your spec knowledge. This means that if you have to use it, you have to provide some structural reasons for it. So the motion in the on the screen for the purpose of this debate, Santa Claus, also known as Father Christmas or Saint Nicholas, is a mythical creature who lives on the North Pole and delivers gifts or coal to the world's children every Christmas Eve. Based on his assessment of their deeds and morality throughout the year, Santa's manufacturing facilities are operated by elves who spend all year making toys and gifts, maintaining Santa's sleigh, and tending to his reindeer in order for Santa to complete this yearly trip. The elves are magically bound by Santa to be unable to leave the village on the North Pole lest they risk revealing the existence of Santa in the village. This also supports an elven revolution against Santa Claus. So some people are going to be like, Santa is oppressing these guys. But like, I'm not sure. I've read the info slide like, more than 10 times. Like, I haven't seen it, you know. I haven't seen it. Maybe you might infer from like the elves are bound, magically to be unable to leave the North Pole. But it doesn't explain that, they are working in, sweatshops and, that they are working there without their own consent and they are being underpaid by Santa. Like usually you'd hear people make analysis beyond what is stated there. And I don't know. I don't think I've seen a Santa Claus movie in any time, but like, I do believe that there are a lot of them. So this means that, which one of the Santa movies are you talking about? If you decide to go beyond this, the motion might imply it, but you have to explain why is it true. Because obviously, if you don't, then it becomes messy because the other side is unwilling to admit that Santa is oppressing the elves and also might provide you structural reasons about why Santa has no incentive to oppress the elves, especially if the condition about bounding them to the North Pole is stated there because of the risk revealing the existence of Santa and the village. So it's unclear why this means that Santa and the elves are operating in sweatshops, and Santa, being caught by machines that they make this. So people make this sort of argument. It's not like you can't make them, but you have to explain why is it the case that this is true, because it's not anywhere in the info slide. Secondly, as well, is that one thing someone can try to do in this motion is to say that, the elves would be successful, and the motion assumes that the elves should be successful beating Santa. I don't think that anywhere in the info stack assumes this, that the elves should be successful, at beating Santa. Some people would just assume that we should support the revolution because Santa is immoral and the elves will win. So every of those claims are things that you have to prove, even if you consider those things to be valuable. In my own assessment of this debate, think that it's much more of a principle, uh, uh, principle discussion. I think that all of those claims about, whether or not Santa is oppressive are contestable within the debate. May not even be the debate in the first place, and it might just be the concept of Santa that might be the debate, whether or not, given that Santa requires the elves and, whether or not the elves and their revolution might be just to say that, we don't want this sort of thing to keep going on. We don't want you to keep rewarding children who you think do good things, at some point. So it might just be that the elves are revolting against the concept of Santa Claus, not their master Santa Claus, because there's nowhere in the motion that implies either. So all of these are explanations that you have to provide rather than assume, which is what a lot of people do. And when they do it, if you're a closing team, please feel free to call it out. You can always anticipate this from prep because usually in hypothetical motions, people always assume beyond what is written in the info slide, either because they have too much knowledge, or they assume a particular stock argument will be used in the debates and are unwilling to explain this or too lazy to explain this. Yeah, the next slide is supposed to be relying too much on the info slide. The motion, can we get the next slide? Okay. The next problem is relying too much on the info slide. So just as much as going beyond what is written on the info slide is a problem, relying too much on the info slide is equally a problem. So the motion here is, the ordinal scale of time lapse is a pathway that defines time continuum and relativity. If one steps into it, it shows you the event of the rest of your lifetime and the most desirable life decisions you could make to live a suitable life without mistakes. The time lapse, however, takes away 10 years of the user's lifespan, and people who don't have up to 10 years to live would die if they attempt to use the time lapse. The time lapse does not reveal the exact amount of years you have to live after using it. This house as an individual would enter the ordinal scale of time lapse. Usually, this motion is debated in 2022. But when we were prepping for this motion, what we sort of ran into as a problem was that we started talking about why people shouldn't kill themselves, and that was just because we were okay, and that was because the reason why that happened, that we relied too much on why people shouldn't kill themselves. We are CEO in that debate. So we started talking about should people step into something that could kill them? Should people have the choice or right to die? That sort of thing. That's what we started discussing in the first 5 minutes of prep. And we sort of answered that question like, yeah, people should. Like, they shouldn't be the debates, because this is like a 50-50 thing. Like, people, if you step into the time lapse, it could take 10 years from your life, you could die, etc. But like, this shouldn't really be the debates. Like, because it's just an individual stepping into the ordinal skin of time lapse. So relying too much on the info slide might just be a problem because just focus on, the fact that people are losing 10 years from their life without really actually explaining anything beyond this. So that might limits the number of clashes that they're able to engage with. Also, that might mean that you don't provide any analysis for anything. Like you don't explain, why losing 10 years of your life is valuable or is bad or good. Or also people might, just assume that given that the motion says, the most desirable decisions of your life, are something that you can access when you use this, then this is a good thing. So relying too much on the info slide would just mean that, use the OSCT, the OSTL rather. Use it because, you are able to know what the most desirable decisions in your life are. But the problem is that knowing the most desirable life decisions that you could make, doesn't mean you would make them. The most desirable life decisions, that you could interpret sufficiently might be betraying a friend. So if this is the case that the most desirable life decision that you would make, getting $1 million would require you betraying a friend, doesn't mean that you're going to do it. Anyway, so knowing this stuff doesn't make people do it. And sometimes people will just assume that knowing this stuff is just going to be good for you, because of the fact that, um, people are going to, people are going to be do it immediately. Or as well, people can also assume, the motion, and it doesn't at any point say that, anyone would know that you stepped into the OSTL. But like some people will just make the argument that, if you step into the OSTL, people expect your life to be good, that sort of thing. So that's why you would use it. But like that would require you that's why you would use the knowledge that you have because people expect your life to be good. But that would require people knowing, which is not anywhere in the info slide. So you have to make the claim that, uh people would be aware, you have to explain why they would be aware, because it's not anywhere in the info slide as well. So that's also a problem with assuming beyond more than what is written in the info slide. But the first two things I identified, with this motion specifically, either on relying on the 10 years that it takes away, which forces you into a clash that may not be, a tipping point in the debate, or by assuming that because of the motion says, people are going to know the most desirable decisions in their life, then their life will be good because that assumes that people would make that decision, which is not always the case. So yeah, one fun thing that we did in this motion was that given that we realized 5 minutes into prep that we are prepping rubbish, this is essentially what we did. So like 5 minutes to prep time, we concluded that the what we are debating was rubbish, and then we scrapped our notes. And in the debate, you're like, oh my god, this debate might be small, in terms of the clashes, so we don't want to get left out. Given that the debate we thought was going to be a short cross if we didn't do something on time. So we forced opening opposition to argue, the case that we abandoned, by pretending that this was the case that we are going to run. So we sort of asked it in a POI to PM, and yeah, opening opposition got, flustered, and then, sort of fell into the trap of, relying too much on the info slide. I don't want to believe that this was a problem that they had in prep, because in some part of their speech, they had elements of trying to move away from this, but they were stuck on, what we identified, which was just a marginal problem that the CAs maybe wanted to trap people into, or, wasn't really just as important. Maybe it was a secondary clash that they wanted to introduce, but wasn't as important just as we identified in prep. So we made a fun out of them, in our speech by saying, they just fell into a trap and allowed us to, have more extension. And that's essentially why we did it, because we just had a problem thinking that presumably, we might just run out of cases or run out of extensions. So we just wanted to make it fun, ask that POI to PM, and everyone sort of in the debate, not just even CG as well, so make comments in their member speech about the fact that if we wanted to run that, then it would be rubbish, and we kept laughing, and we still laugh about it, up to this moment, and that was like a very good moment in the room, because like the judges also were laughing at the point where we pointed it out that we abandoned that case in the first 5 minutes of prep. So yeah, relying too much on the info slide in this way could just be bad for you, as well as the fact that the way it could be bad for you, you could also make it as bad for others as well and force them, to debate the info slide. And you want to be explicit with it, so point out to the judges that this is not the most important issue in the debate and they're relying too much on the info slide. Okay, so that's it. I believe that the next slide is about stock arguments. So just like we talked about, with hypothetical motions, the reason why they are set is because the CAs want you to talk about, a particular issue. It might be just an ethical issue. It might be, an issue of experience. How do people experience stuff? Once you identify the issue that the CAs want you to talk about, the next step that you should move into is what are arguments. There are always arguments that revolve around this. So I think that the motion that we identified earlier about a world without a desire for revenge, usually is to explain, how, people interact with each other, whether or not it is the case that people's experience on a day-to-day and the desire for revenge, activate some sort of escalation as a problem in society. So these are norms or arguments about violence and conflict that you're used to at every point. Why do people, escalate tensions? Why do tensions escalate? Why do people participate? What do they think about? What motivates people to participate in conflict? Or it might be the case that, how people feel, about when someone hurt them. How do they express that feeling of being hurt? Closure, catharsis. These are simple, issues that, stock arguments in every debate, where do people get closure and where do people get more catharsis? Is it from the desire for revenge or is it in the absence of that desire? Or, what do punishment systems look like in society? These are arguments that you're always familiar with from debates about, how do you say, social justice, sorry, criminal justice. So you're always familiar with, what frameworks people interact with, how social justice systems evolve, criminal justice systems evolve, punishment, rehabilitation, how they would have evolved differently, etc. But these are like stock arguments that you're always familiar with. So it's like, oh, I don't know what to run. It's just because you haven't identified what the C is, really set that motion for. And you can always identify by removing the abstract nature of that motion and just thinking about deeply, what is the clash that they are deciding to isolate? What do they want us to talk about? For example, in this case, about a world without a desire for revenge. So usually you can always use those stock arguments, but this means that you should use the stock argument relative to the motion. So when you think about a stock argument, like when you hear about revenge, you often know that it applies in terms of people engage in revenge and it affects conflict. People engage in reflect, it affects social justice movement. People engage in revenge and it affects criminal justice. People engage in revenge and it affects how they feel, and how they get closure and catharsis. But you want to make this argument relative to the motion, how the motion, impacts this sort of thing, instead of making this, claims about these things in isolation from the debate. So how does the absence of the desire for revenge lead to or minimize conflict escalation? How does this, provide people more catharsis or closure? You already identified the clash. The next step then is to explain how the motion relates or affects that particular clash as well. And yes, the final thing is principled argument in hypothetical motion. So I think that usually they're not the most important thing because, in hypothetical motions, the most important thing are usually high impact. Like there are high impact motions that the CAs want people to debate without breaking the debate. So principled arguments are usually, moral claims, but sometimes in some debates, in some hypothetical motions, it might be what is the ethical thing to do. The South prefers a world where people cannot lie. Like beyond the fact that that motion is high impact, it might be which world is the more moral world. to live in, etc. So it might just be beyond the experiences that people have, beyond how these experiences affect them on a day-to-day basis. It might also be the principle. But when you're always discussing a principle, in this sort of debate, you should always be sensible about it, so that you're not on the back foot. Because, as I said, the high impact in the debate will oftentimes beat you. So it might be that you want to frame out this high impact before discussing the principle. Either by identifying that those impacts are symmetric, because there are external social reasons for those things to happen in the first place. But the motion about this house really is that, behind the veil of ignorance, this house prefers to be an individual, born believing that they can single-handedly change the world versus, you know, uh, believing that they're a pawn in the grand scheme of things. People might argue, that this affects social systems, social structures in terms of how people, are willing to collaborate with the next person, to achieve social change or not. But there are external reasons for this. People might argue that this might, if you feel that you're a pawn in the grand scheme of things, that means that you don't wake up in the morning to grab a cup of coffee. Uh, but or if you feel that you can single-handedly change the world, then you set unrealistic expectations for yourself. That would, require you to believe that people have no socialization, or this person has no socialization in that world. Or it is the case that if you believe that you're a pawn in the grand scheme of things, then you don't feel hunger. So yes, there are certain things that people might argue that are high impact in this kind of debates that don't make any sense. So you can always reduce those high impacts by framing them out, either explain that there are external reasons for those impacts to accrue or not accrue in the first place, and then before moving on to explaining the principle that you want to discuss. But also, and I think finally on principled arguments here, is that may not be advisable to run if you do identify that the CAs have clearly framed this out. So in a motion where, like this house prefers a world without the desire for revenge, or, this house would take the peel motion, it would be kind of bad for you to sort of argue that, consent, it's not like implanting a chip into people's head. It's a motion about a choice. Should you take the pill or not take the pill? And then someone, stands up debating about consent, um, or like why this consent isn't, some sort of informed consent. Like I'm wondering here because like if it's about a single individual, it might depend on what the info style is in this case. But you always want to check, gut check this. Like, do people really want to argue about consent in this debate? Is there a specific part of the world in that frames out consent? Secondly, if the technology widely exists, then, why are you making a principled claim about inequality? It might just not be strategic for you to make this claim because obviously the motion says that this is, widely accessible. You might want to point out a small instance where there might be inequality in its distribution. But like I said, that's a small instance that you're competing against in a high impact round, which most likely means that you may not win because this impact might not be very compelling or persuasive as well. Additionally, if social norms evolve differently, then what is principally valuable, because a principle is what we consider to be valuable, what we consider to be morally good. So, in a world where there is a desire for revenge, but the value is, historically as moral or social values evolve, is that you should act on against someone who has hurt you. You should take your dignity back. Restoration of dignity becomes a principled value in that particular world. And the specific way that you restore your dignity is by hurting someone who hurt you back. Like revenge creates some sort of social value and changes the principle. So it might be the case that making a principled claim about, why restoration of dignity uh, by revenge in a world where there's no desire for revenge may not be, as compelling, because what people conceptualize to be morally valuable changes in a world where people don't have the desire for revenge. So, acting or, if someone hurts you, people don't expect you, to react against them, or what might be the principally valuable thing there might be to rationalize what they did as good. So it might be just advisable to argue why that as a consequence is a bad thing, because the properties of that world, which is what essentially you might derive those principles from, changes. What is socially valuable as well changes in that world. So revenge may not be principally valuable. So it might be, not very strategic to argue that there's violated principle to act in a way that promotes your dignity, if it is the case that your dignity is still promoted in a world without a desire for revenge, but just in a different way that society considers to be morally valuable. So yes, I think that is it. If people do have any questions at this point, then I would be very happy to take these questions.
Hi Sam.
Yeah,
So sorry. Yeah. So sorry that I'm echoing. So there was this one question from one of the participants. They were talking about something called veil of ignorance. So they were wanting to understand how the veil of ignorance would sort of like effectuate in debates, and how do you do hypothetical motions which involve the veil of ignorance?
Okay, very good question. So I have this how do you say unconventional advice about veil of ignorance. So I would encourage you to take this with a pinch of salt. But the veil of ignorance, what it simply means is that you don't know your position, you don't know your starting point in the world. You don't know your starting point in the universe. You could be rich or poor, you could be black, white, Hispanic, Asian, etc. You could be male, female, non-binary, agender. So you don't know, what your background in the world. You're just a blank slate. So that's what it means. So that's what being behind the veil of ignorance looks like. You're a human being, but just a blank slate, no property. You don't know where your eyes. You have two eyes, but you don't know if they're going to be, what features those eyes are going to have that would, amount to, knowing what your race would look like as well. Usually in this kind of debates, what people try to always argue is the median, the average individual. And that's strategic. That's, nice to do, what the average individual would look like, what it would be. I think that it's always nice to make arguments that are blind to the average individual, given it is the case that it could be on the extremes, this individual could be poor, not the average individual. But usually the way people try and make this analysis that approximates the average individual is that they are the dominance of the population, like most of the people in the world are average. I don't think that the statistics is correct anyways. So it might just be relative to what average means. So maybe the average individual is relative to famous celebrities, etc. So it might be to mitigate against the fact that this person presumably is a celebrity. I think that most of the time people wouldn't argue against this, so it might be safe. But usually it's to make arguments that are blind of the individual. But how do you weigh your arguments? And becomes the most important thing, because to be very honest, when you're debating behind the veil of ignorance, people would also make claims on either side that interact more with whether or not the person is rich or whether or not the person is poor. I think that is something that is you cannot object against. People intuitively make these claims. They wouldn't make these claims explicitly, but those claims would approximate to hurting more people who are poor and, hurting more people who are rich. And sorry, hurting less people who are rich. But there are two advice that I will give here. The first one is, I think that what you need to explain more is how people interact with each other. What are your interactions with the next person going to look like? And that might be something that's easy to explain on a generic level. How do you value friends, family? These are stuff that everyone in life considers to be valuable, regardless of their social background. So it might be to argue less on the, individual benefits I approximate more with your condition, either making more money, which might maybe not be as valuable for someone who is, rich, or maybe might be more valuable for someone who is poor, or, your ability to participate in social activism, which might be less proximate to someone who is, from a majority, and a social majority than someone who is from a social minority. So it might be making more arguments that approximate more to the human experience, your human experience, the expectations that you set in your life, when you achieve something, how do you view that achievement? When you have friends and family, how do you interact with them? Do they, are you weird to them? Do they like you, based on the properties that you have behind the veil of ignorance? So these are the arguments that are generally advisable to make, because those arguments are blind and approximate every individual in this world, presumably, would care about their family, or if they don't care, this would affect them negatively as well. So every individual in the world, achieves something, maybe the poor person might, pick up, a broom from the floor, or maybe go cut wood in the bush, and the rich person might make it $1 million. Different from what the utility machine would tell you, but how do people, when they achieve a success, something that they consider to be successful, how do they interact with it? How do they view it, with this motion and the way that it's implemented? So an example and what I was discussing today, was that the motion about believing that you can single-handedly change the world, etc. It might be the case that someone who achieves 100% attendance in the classroom, when they single-handedly believe that they can change the world, they might feel this as they might approximate the achievements to what am I going to do next? Now I feel very empowered to take on the world. And someone who feels that they're cornered in the grand scheme of things might feel like oh my God, this just serves a purpose in school systems and their desire to want us to force us to attend school. This argument is blind to what conditions that you come from. And this impact that this argument relies on doesn't rely on whether or not you're rich or poor. It just relies on how you view one particular achievement, which is irreducible. So this argument cannot be broken down by whether or not you are rich or poor, because both people can be able to access that particular impact as well. Or even if it is the case that they can't access that same impact, this argument would apply to any form of success that anyone would achieve and how they view that particular success. So approximating your success in any form to be a product of a social system, to serve a social system, as opposed to attributing your success to be more empowering, which might be a claim that you want to make and is blind to, the social structure, or this social condition that you have. The next thing is harm minimization, and this is the way that you should weigh your arguments. If it is the case that you don't know where you're going to be born in the world, like if you don't know what your conditions are going to be, the general sense that we have is always minimize harms to ourselves, not to maximize benefit, because maximizing those benefits will what sort of capacity do you have, but minimizing harm, on what the conditions of that world look like relative to what the motion gives you access to. So maximizing benefits would rely on the fact that certain social structures are willing to give you those benefits, etc., that the way that you would interact with them, your capacity specific that will be able to overcome theirs, and that's relative to your position in that system. But minimizing harm, if it is the case that there's a potential that you would experience that harm, you want to minimize it, you want to avoid harm, and this is the way that we think about. So if you're a blank slate and you are presented the world to you, you don't know where you're going to be, what the position is going to be, and you're presented two options. This is not a general rule, but usually might coincide with someone who is, poor and from a terrible background. But you're not making this argument in an obvious way. You're just making the impact and explain why, with this impact, if I presented you this world and presented you this harm as a blank state, which would you choose? You have the potential of getting this harm or the potential of getting this benefit. You're a blank slate. You don't know where your position in the world is going to be. Where would you lean towards? Usually people would lean towards harms minimization, as opposed to, maximizing benefit, given how risk averse that we are as a species. So yeah, this is usually the way that I think that you can go about, making points or making arguments when it comes to behind the veil of ignorance. I don't know if this answers the question or makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. Just one last thing, probably. So when we are like doing hypothetical motions, there's also like a lot of maybe cultural sensitivities and other proclivities that we don't know about. Sometimes when there is like a region specific motion, for example, if you're talking about hypothetical scenario in India or maybe Africa in one of the many nations, what do you think one should do if they're not really aware about these cultural sensitivities and how to like go about emotion when they're facing these issues?
Sure. I think that usually those motions always come in like, some kind of info slide, that tries to explain to some extent what the idea behind that motion is, or what the condition within that particular place is. And the way to think about it is that anything that's not included in an info slide by the CAP team, either it is the case that they are good, trusted CAP team, which means that, they will probably include everything that's necessary for you to debate that particular motion. Or it is a case that you just haven't read enough. It might just be a problem with knowledge. And that in that case, you just want to pray that you're not opening government. But usually it's the first one, which is that everything that you need to debate that motion is already in the info slide. And you just have to analyze it, which is you just have to explain how those things are benefits or how those impacts would accrue in the first place. So I don't think that there is so much spec knowledge that is usually required in debates, unless that spec knowledge is something that you would require before prep time, which is that if you don't have it, then as long as you're not opening government, which might just be a problem, then you might, be at a disadvantage. But I feel like this question might apply broadly to just, how do you debate, context-specific motions when you really have no idea about that specific, cultural thing that they're discussing. So I think one way to also go about this as well might be to use stock arguments that you already are aware of in some case. So I think that there was this motion I debated one time about India. Like, this is not a hypothetical motion, but like just a general political motion about India. And, I think it was just a politics motion. And what I did try to do was try to break down the motion to saying that because the Gov teams already sort of characterized that India, the BJP is like very strong, at the center, etc. But like what we tried to break that motion was to try and break it down to why it will lose support at the local level, etc. Why this would just be bad. So it might just be just general stock argumentation, because I think generally I never had an idea about the sort of thing that they were discussing, the specific thing that was in the motion that they were discussing. But I think that it did sort of approximate to the fact that some people will be dissatisfied with this policy. The BJP does it. But I don't know much about the BJP, in all fairness. And the sort of specific people and names that they mention, or this sort of specific thing that they were going to do. But what I just know is that if it did connote to the fact that some people will be dissatisfied, but the power that the BJP has is enough to, get past the dissatisfaction, then the stock argument was just to say that, it might mean that you lose power to some extent at the local level. That's just bad. So that's the way that we try to explain it. Like, just use the stock argument that it's easy for you to lose support at the local level and for people to campaign against you and beat you there. Additionally, this is where you might just use other things that approximate to that particular environment. What are other properties that exist in that particular culture or context? And these are where you might derive arguments for, and you want to approximate those arguments to what the motion is about. What are other things that you know about this particular place in Africa? What are other things that you know about places that are close to this place in Africa? And this might be a way that you try to navigate through this motions. Otherwise, I think that the first way to identify is every information that you require to debate the motion present in the info slide? If yes, then I think that you should proceed with just the general principles that apply to that particular debate. If not, then maybe you are not OG, then you just wait for the debate to play out and try to, understand, that specific context. Maybe OG has a lot of knowledge, or other things in the debate have a lot of knowledge. They might, try to, debate based on the knowledge that they have. Or if you are OG or the rest of the team and you can't wait, then you might want to debate relative to other things like stock arguments that you can approximate to that particular motion, or other features or properties of that particular place that you are aware of, or that you are aware of that approximate to that particular environment, like countries that are close to that country. And finally, is that this might just be a reading problem, and it might just be a wake-up call to read more. I don't know if that answers the question.
That's perfect. Any other questions from the participants?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so there was a motion in one of your slides that said that this house, as Ethan would continue his relationship with Mia. So I think the arguments from the prop are like very, very anticipated, and like very, very easy to make, like saying that even if someone by the lottery of birth are assigned or like are associated to a particular species, this should not be the particular reason for the determination of your love and affection for them. And if you have been with them for a long amount of time, so yeah, it really does mean that you must be continuing the relationship. But what could be some good arguments from Op? That is my first question. I mean, the counterfacts. Sorry, the counterfactual from Op would be, like breaking up that relationship, right? So, like, how could be the arguments based on them, or could there be a better counterfactual than breaking up, perhaps?
No, so I think that if your question is based on like the specific counterfactual, that what could be the better counterfactual that opposition could have, I think it's very clear. It's either that you continue the relationship or not. That's only what is within the reasonable capacity of the actor to do. I don't think that there's a third thing that you can introduce in a counterfactual. What you might want to soft land here is why that breakup is going to be good, etc. Why is that the breakup not going to be toxic, and why is both individuals able to come to a compromise? So that allows the breakup to the way most breakups are messy, and leave people with no closure. So this is what you want to mitigate against, because I think that it's easy for the prop to just say, like, if you guys had a very fulfilling relationship and the only reason for why you want to break up might be that this person is a clone, not that they cheated on you, which is the normal way that we perceive when we should break up with people, when they're toxic, when they're bad people, etc. And it's not the case that this person is very, very hostile to you, that you just want to break up with them because they're a clone. Then it might mean that you might regret, or you just compare your future relationships with them, that you share a very good connection with Mia, as the info slide interprets. So you might just want to explain why the breakup process allows for you to be able to access closure in a way that overcomes that. So it's just to explain why the breakup is good, not toxic, as opposed to I don't think that there's a thought counterfactual that you can introduce that goes beyond whether or not you continue in that relationship or you break up. Presumably, I think that maybe this is a case that people could argue that you could continue the relationship now, but you guys could break up later. But I think that all of these are very speculative and may move away from the clash in a way that it's also plausible, so that people could also make counterclaim that you could break up and continue on later. But so that means that it's not really a very good debate to go that route. So I think that the two comparatives are on prop you continue, on up you break up. What you can't be able to describe either is why that breakup process is good or bad in a way that allows you to access closure and move on, as opposed to, which is what Gov is like, it's a challenge on that counterfactual. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Also, my second question is that how to be a 79 or 78 score speaker, because I think the only problem that I see with myself is I think with analysis a lot, and also with little bit of weighing as well. So how to break that ceiling of just being stuck with 76 and 77 and go to 80 or 79 or 78.
Fair enough. I think that the first thing I would say is that speaks are oftentimes, very, very arbitrary in the way that the people who might judge you may just have a perception of what the speaks range looks like. So I think that may not be, the most, important thing to always focus on. But in terms of how you can improve specifically, or get, higher speaks, all things being equal as well, is to always ensure that what I mean specifically by this is that you're anticipating the response to your case, that before those responses are made. That's usually the way that you try to make this argument. So I think that this helps you, get to the top end of the speaks bracket, because that's essentially what the brackets are about, whether or not your arguments are vulnerable to competent responses. So this means that usually the argument that people would make, every time in every debate are usually arguments that are within the debate matter. So that you always know the arguments that you would run in every debate, usually from the first principles that you have, or because of the fact that you have been in a similar debate before. The problem here is that a lot of people don't anticipate responses that will be made to those cases, and that means that they just make the same argument. So the way to improve is to anticipate, what is the response that you're going to get, and build that into your case. So, for example, I think I made this example in the session about rebuttal. So I once made an argument about democracy, which is a very unpopular argument that could get you low speaks as well. Because a lot of people have had it, so it's not very interesting and novel. So I think that the way that I try to make this argument, just to explain within that context, one, why democracy has been taken away, because the other side's response is to say that there is no perfect democracy. So if I just said that this debate on our side is more democratic, then I'm not really winning here. I just have to push them further by saying that the democracy on their side is worse, or worsens, that the autocracy worsens rather, because they had to defend an autocracy. So I had to explain that the autocracy on their side becomes more repressive because of the fact that the echo chambers of the people who surround those governments are autocratic people, etc. So there's no willingness or incentive to transition to a democracy, because the deeper you go, then the more you are in that space. So that anticipates the response that people would say, there's no perfect democracy. Yeah, there's no perfect democracy, but that avoids a repressive autocracy that you're going to get, because the other side's comparative might be imperfect democracies versus benevolent dictatorships. I don't want that. So I'm just going to anticipate that our dictatorship is not benevolent and prove it. Secondly, people would always say, why is democracy a good thing? That's a response that you always want to anticipate. So what I tried to do was to say, democracy is a good thing within the context of Africa because, very heterogeneous. So people need some form of representation. And that's why, any democracy is bad, because of the fact that you have a local government chairman, etc., that's from your, community or your group that, you believe speaks with the people at the center, then you're much more willing to, or less willing rather to join, a terrorist group because elections happen, etc. You can elect someone from your own group. People closely identify with, their communities within African settings. So if it's the case that you don't have any form of representation, people are much more likely to be to join, terrorist groups, how do you say, secessionist movements to leave the states that would increase the amount of violence and also, worsen the repression that you get from the autocracy, given that their legitimacy becomes more fringe and fragile. That makes them more, willing to punish dissidents. Those people are more vulnerable to be recruited by people who take advantage of the fact that, there is no representation for us and recruit more people. So it's just to explain that the situation worsens, which preempts any response about, I don't really have to argue why democracy is a principally valuable thing, in order to win, which might be easily challenged here. But just have to prove that within this context, democracy is specifically good. Between all of the other corollaries that are in this argument, about what democracy looks like, and why, democracy in principle is valuable, all of this additional stuff anticipates any response that you're going to get. So that's one way, is that you build any preemptive response that you would get to your case or that you identify is going to come to your case into your own mechanisms. So that makes your case more robust beyond the fact that you don't miss any analytical gaps in your case as well. The second thing is to be as detailed as possible. So death is is an impact, but like how people die, is more mortifying and gets you more speaks than just saying that people are going to die. So usually when people say hope, they say hope or they say, courage, they say it vaguely. They say death very vaguely. Describing how people die might just, be more intense, which people die, If you say that sanctions are bad because they hurt the economy and that would mean that people starve, then really that's where you stop. But like when you talk about intensely why, that would mean that children have to be emancipated, they have to, parents have to look at their kids, the rhetoric that's involved there is good, but the detail is what, it's the detail, the legend rather is in the legend is in the detail. So that's usually what you're trying to do here. You're trying to explain, how that process of dying is horrible, which sort of appeals to the judges in some way. That means that, you just describe what starvation looks like beyond, people starving, which they might experience on a day-to-day basis. Like now, when I feel like after the session, I need to get food. But describing, how intense it is, on a child who has to, suffer from hunger and starvation in front of their parents, would make what you're discussing more grandiose than, it would be if you just said starvation for a lot of people within these countries. Or, this might be, you want to apply this with caution as well, because like, so you don't, trigger people. But I think that this is the best way to go about impacting, is to be as detailed as possible. Who does this affect? The way that emotion affects the poor is different from the way that it affects the middle class. When you put those groups together, it might make it difficult for you to make, you just make generic impact. That means that you're not able to go very, very deep, in terms of explaining why, if government takes away, social services, that might mean that, the middle class are less willing to, invest in, the economy, etc. And that also might mean that the poor are not able to afford groceries. So these are like two different impacts, the poor starving and, the middle class, having less money for them to be able to invest back into the economy, which, sort of drives economic growth as well. Investing in the economy might look like, things like, buying houses, for example, which is very valuable because if they don't, the middle class don't engage in that particular process, that might mean that, the value of those housing goes up, which might trigger an economic crisis as well. So you want to ensure that the middle class still feels satisfied. So this is like different impact because someone would just say, if you take away money from social services, people would suffer, but they would suffer differently, and being able to be as detailed as possible and describe what the suffering looks like gets you more speaks. Also as well, like I've sort of implied, rhetoric is important. So like, sounding very, nice in your speech gets you more speaks. So I would recommend this particular workshop, which I think, did help a lot. There's this workshop on the substance of style by Lee Chun Wei. It was a very, very good workshop, in terms of how you develop style. I've listened to like a lot of people talk about rhetoric and improving persuasiveness as well. I do believe that we would have some here at some point. But yeah, if you were looking for like how to, maybe improve on style, I think that might also be very, very valuable for you, because also some people like, people who sound nice and sound like they're telling a story. So this might be a way to get speaks to go up. But the most important thing, as is dictated by the manual, is arguments that do stand up to challenge. So which means that what you're more concerned about is what is the response that my case is likely to receive, because it's unlikely that your case hasn't ever been thought of before, but just basically how people would analyze or explain that particular case. Yeah, so I think additionally as well is to also pick out what stuff are valuable in the debate and what stuffs are not. And I think that an example is I debated a motion about this house prefers a world where religions teach determinism as opposed to free will. So like usually everyone is just going to jump into the debate and start explaining, why people would start committing crime and not, true, but like religion is not really as powerful, as it was, back in the late. So this house prefers a religion, sorry, that teaches determinism over a religion that teaches free will. Those motions are different. It's different from this house prefers the world. Because like some religions teach free will and some religions teach determinism. So yeah. In that particular motion, what we said here was that a religion that teaches free will is sort of better for people, because like that means that they are able to interact with God and they're able to change their faith. So like this is just valuable for people in terms of the religious experience. So those were the arguments that we made. And we just sort of framed out the top half, that was discussing, how this impacts people, because there are other social structures that will prevent you from committing crime if you try to commit crime, beyond the fact that not everyone is a religious person as well. So not everyone also believes that religion that you believe in. So if that means that, your religion teaches determinism, and that means that you feel that you have no moral responsibility and you go out to start hurting people, then someone is going to kill you because they also don't believe in that as well. So it just affects how people interact with each other within the religion. How valuable is that religious experience? Do people talk in Bible study sessions, etc.? So making more nuanced claims are also one good way to get speaks as well, because understanding what emotion requires you to do, makes you sound fresh coming from closing, as well as the fact that, if you understand that you're able to set this burden earlier in the opening, your speech stands out to the rest of the debates, and maybe most of the things will be contingent to the analysis that you're provided. So that's just one additional thing beyond the stuff I mentioned earlier about, anticipating response to your case and impacting in detail. Does this help?
Yes, thank you very much.
No problem.
Hi, Sam.
Toby, you were raising your hand.
So Toby had a question. Yes, that was what I was saying.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Toby was raising your hand.
So what I wanted to ask was for the Mia question. I'm sorry, the motion about this house to choose to break up with Mia. I think I don't know what we do is that I know I remember we did a spa right on that, and a thought that came to us was that because I think the major clash that was happening in the top half was to say that the fact that Mia wasn't like didn't trust her boyfriend enough to share this information with him, what means that she didn't necessarily love him or something like that. So I think what now happened in the closing was someone was trying to prove that if Ethan was in the same shoe as Mia, that he would likely take the same action that she took. So I wanted to confirm if that is is that a valid way to go about analyzing the motion, or is it not required at all?
Okay, so I'll try to see if I get the last part very clearly, but I think because we debated this motion as well, I do get this concerns. Like people said it on the up bench. And that debate in our room was a gut bench win, because I remember that the up team made the claim that me, I wasn't trustworthy, etc., and like she didn't tell it. But like that's a problem I identified in the workshop, which is like I checked the info slide, like I never found it. Like there's no part in the info slide that says Mia knows that she is genetically engineered. She only reassures him at the point where he's asking, at the point where he finds out that she actually has developed her own identity. like, this is her, this is me, I have my own identity, I have my own experience. There's no point that says, she knew, she had some like, she had some epistemic knowledge of that she was a clone, or, that's it's also possible to infer as well that she knew during the relationship. So that makes the debate very, very messy. And this is like a very fringe claim, which is also something that you can easily respond to. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Yeah, specifically your question about closing up. What can you go over it again, so I can talk about it more quickly?
No, so okay, sorry, yeah. So what I was trying to say was what closing half did was to try and say that look, if Ethan was in Mia's shoes, then he would probably also take the same action that Mia did to protect like the person that he's dating, because he doesn't know, like, there's a lot of factors to consider when sharing that kind of secret. It could implicate him or something like that, something like that. So that was like the route that they were trying to, like, they tried to use to separate themselves from their opening, to say that look, we'll first of all prove to you why Ethan would most likely do this if they were in like each other's shoes, and then why he's not going to likely get any sort of like benefit, given that he's heavily invested in the love that he has for her, so he shouldn't like
Yeah.
break up with her at the end of.
Yeah, I think I do understand what you're saying, as well, the closing half. So I think that's essentially what I was interpreting as well. The problem with that claim, I think that it's a route that you can go based on the debate that happens in that room. Given that, the debate becomes whether or not Mia is a liar, and that's why, you should break up with Mia, or whether or not lying in this case is something that's functional, which becomes, a sort of clash in that debate. But I think that this isn't valuable route to go as closing, because the problem here is that why is it the case that Ethan will be able to internalize that this is what he would have done? Because the problem with that particular attempt by closing to, say, Mia lied, but, Ethan would have lied if he was in this situation as well, is that the debate is an actor debate. It's about Ethan. So if Ethan doesn't values the fact that, Mia shouldn't have lied, then why would he be able to internalize that lying is valuable? So that's an analytical gap that the closing team has to pass through, because it's an actor debate. Because one, it's not just to say that lying is valuable, it's this as Ethan would continue with the relationship. So given that the debate is about Ethan, you have to explain why Ethan's values about not lying will coincide with him finding that lying is valuable, especially if the reason why he wants to break up or wants to continue with this relationship might be the case that he thinks that Mia has lied to him about some stuff, earlier. If he thinks that, oh, I could have been in this situation, why would he approximate that I would have lied if I was in this situation? Then he should have lied as well. So I just think that I think there's a fundamental problem with this particular route, but it's going to be hard to see the closing team to win by trying to attribute the fact that you could have done this as well. It's like moral luck, because this debate is an actor debate, so yeah, maybe moral luck, but why would this person be able to think about this specifically in this way, and how would this affect them if they decide to continue with the relationship or they decide to break up? That's the more important question in the debate. And additionally as well, I think that it's just speculative anyways. Everything just relies on something that isn't in the info slide, which is that Mia knew earlier on, and that's what Ethan is actually breaking up with her for, which I think that the info slide is much more clearer, that the reason why he's breaking up with her is because he doesn't consider the experience to be genuine. Not that he doesn't consider the person to be genuine, but doesn't consider the experiences to be real. He doesn't consider the fact that this individual has the agency to interact with him specifically in this way, beyond the fact that he thinks that this person has lied. So it's kind of hard to infer that Ethan considers lying as bad, which would mean that he internalizes this experience in the relationship as negative. And that is going to be a very long route. You have to prove that Ethan thinks lying is bad, and that's why he cannot continue this relationship. Then have to explain that if this is the case that he thinks that lying is bad, then he wouldn't have lied in the first place, which is also an analysis that you have to overcome as well. So is he able to rationalize lying as bad? What is he able to rationalize different extent of lying as bad, which isn't implicit in the info slides? It's kind of it's a route that you can go. Requires more analysis, but also is very risky because it's like easy for the other teams to frame you out. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So it's like a first of all situation. If you're lucky.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't like to say I don't like to think that any situations are first of all. Not because there's a general rule against it, but yeah, it everything else depends on what happens in the debate. Because just like you pointed out, opening opposition has made a claim that you should break up with her because she lied, and CJ is making a response that she can. I think that in this case that Ethan can rationalize that he would have done the same. So both teams in the short diagonal are making are clashing on the same thing. If the long diagonal is talking about something else and they're able to explain why it's more important, then they would win. If they are not, then they would lose. So it depends on which material has more explanation about why it's important or more value in the long cross. If the long cross argues something different relative to the short cross, and also depends between either the long cross and the short cross who is able to prove their case as well. So who proves why Mia's lie has any imprint on Ethan's life, or who proves in CG why Ethan's lie is something that Mia's lie is something that Ethan is able to rationalize as positive or good and is able to move past it. I think that this is not entirely what we can describe as a first of all scenario, given that there are other factors that might be present as well in that debate, just like I identified, like the extent of analysis, or just a different issue that we consider to be important, or that other teams are able to weigh to be relatively important as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think the other question I wanted to ask is just like a verification. So like for the elf revolution motion, right? I just wanted to ask, you said there are some things that we could like I don't know, will I say fiat in the motion, but is sometimes sort of risky because there are some things that we could fear, but we need to explain why we fear those things. So I wanted to ask if this is something that could be allowed in that motion, to say like, oh, probably these elves are guys that because of them being bound to Santa Claus, they don't age, so they are like sort of immortal because of that connection that they have with Santa Claus or something like that. So like that sort of and that sort of like frame, is it something that is allowed, even though like it's not verified that elves are immortal? We don't know, nobody knows, but it is something that
Yeah.
is sort of permissible to like run.
You can't fiat this, so like you can't make this some sort of fiat. Like that's the thing with hypothetical motions. Like I think at some point some people try to fiat that certain things are present in that world. Certain things are present because they are empirically verifiable in our world, so they must be present in that world as well. But you have to analyze. If there's something that you're pointing at that we don't know about, like whether or not the elves do not age, it's something that the info slide may not say. You might identify that that's the reason why Santa bound them there, and that's a consequence of Santa binding them to that world. But what you want to do is explain, why that this is missing. Why Santa bound them here because so that they don't age, but why? So your claim could be true. It's something that may not be sometimes empirically verifiable. We are looking into that world and seeing that the elves don't age, and we can't see it in the info slide. We can't see that world, but you can analyze this. Like if you have some reason to believe that that's why Santa bound them there, then you can analyze that this is why, or this is plausible. So you can just provide this. I don't know if that makes sense. Like the fiat that you will talk about is like if that fiat is present, like assuming the technology exists, this house would do this. Like assuming feasibility, this house would support militarization of the AU. Those are like where you have some level of fiat. But like if you have something in the info slide that you think happens, then in some way there's a question that is in your mind, which is why does it happen? Which is what you need to provide as some analytical explanation for why that thing exists. Otherwise, you run the risk of other teams disputing this property that you have provided of that world that doesn't exist. And the risk as well is that, if it is the case that they're able to show that this is not in the info slide anywhere, and that you're just assuming this, then you might be at risk of losing. So if you want to fiat, then this might rely on maybe general things like the motion about this hospital is that behind the veil of ignorance. So you might want to assume that let's debate on the middle ground. Let's not go extreme. Those kind of debates are debates that you want to maybe force people to debate on. Based on the fiat that this debate is about the extremes. Let's go to the middle. But in debates that are very clear, that do not require people to go to the extreme, so there's no caution that people are throwing caution to the wind. If you want to establish some ground for a particular case, you have to be very sensitive to whether or not people would agree. If they would disagree, then you have to provide reasons for it in order for it to stand. Otherwise, you just run the risk of people just calling it out that there's no analytical basis for it and just framing it out of the ground.
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Does anyone else have any more questions?
Yes, I have a question. So, as you just
Sure.
told the other person about identifying fiats, could you please explain how to identify trade-offs? Do trade-offs really mean the essential end goal that a side is trying to achieve, or is it something else? And likewise, what is a delta? And what is
That whether or not the state justified. So the way that this is like, what is the trade-off? It's like the other side is arguing for a benefit that you cannot access, and you're arguing as well for a benefit that they cannot access as well. So these trade-offs usually happen in two forms. You have some impact trade-off, and you have some analysis trade-off. So this means that you both are chasing different impacts. So that means that that's what you guys are trade-off. This person wants to achieve equality. No, I'm not just good. I think equality is always very desirable for everyone. So let's say that there's this motion I said recently about neobanking. So the motion was that this house would list neobanks. Like the neobanks are like banks that are don't have any physical branch. Don't use that standard bank procedures of establishing a bank. So the motion that was this house would make neobanks to require them to be publicly listed in the countries that they operate in. So on Gov, presumably the claim that you are making here is that they should be publicly listed, so people can have more investor confidence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People can have more faith in the bank. The bank can have more resources. This might compete with a different impact on the up, which is that on a different impact on volatility that this would introduce. So what you guys might be trading off here, it might be your benefit of more investment, more returns versus maybe their harm of volatility, and why stability of investment might be more important than the volatility of volatile investment that you have on your side. So you are arguing that you want more investments. They are arguing that they want more stability in those particular institutions. So that's the trade-off here. You're arguing for two different impacts. You don't want their impact as much as you want yours, and they don't want your impact as much as they want theirs. Ways to go about this easily is to try and mitigate their benefit as much as possible. Also, the second form of trade-off, or the second order of trade-off, is analysis. Like, you guys agree on the impact, but you guys just don't want to achieve it in different ways. So that you might guys be trading off. That's what you are trading off here. So you guys you think that the pathway to achieving equality might be giving quotas to women, and the other side might think is via how do you say, more funding, more money being provided for education for women, as opposed to quotas. So this might be, you guys are arguing for the same benefit of equality, but the trade-off specifically here might be money over systemic inclusion of women. So that just the analysis that you guys are trading off specifically here. On delta and what it means. This is like a mathematical term that indicates the change. That's what it means. Like it's a mathematical term, and that's the best way I can describe it, because how close I did mathematics. So what it means essentially is, what is the change? If you say that you're going to get more investment, what is the delta? And what this means here is, it's not like neobanks don't have money now. what is the change in money that they have when you give them money? When you make them publicly listed, what's the amount? How significant is the money that they get, and what changes in terms of the money pool? This also occurs in two ways. It might be in terms of behavior. Does the motion have sufficient way to change the behavior of people, or does the motion, if people change their behavior, would they have the capacity to act, in a way that changes anything in the real world? So yeah, it might be to say that there are other things that can give us the same benefit. So which means that there's no change. Maybe there's more investment from people. People invest, but that comes at the risk of having big investors leave, so the delta is negative, so the change is negative. You have more investment from people, you have less investment from companies or private equity firms because we think that this business is unstable to invest in. So that's what you're identifying as the delta in the round. The delta in investment is specific to a particular benefit and what changes. Also, it might be relatable to a particular behavior and what changes as well. I don't know if that answers your question and if it makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Prakusi, for the comment in the chat. So yes, if there are no more questions, is there any more questions? Please feel free to ask. If there are no more, then I'm very happy to end the session. Yeah, thanks everyone. It was fun, and I think I had a nice time. I hope you do. And I do think that the slides as well as the links will be available. So if you do need to, write down on anything, I think it's important for you to it's important to have a list of things that you need to characterize in every hypothetical motion, and always know that nobody in any debates will be able to do all 5 of those things in 14 minutes. They will try, but they can't do all of it. That means that you would never be able to complain that, oh, I didn't have an extension. You will always have one if you're actually thinking of those things properly, as is identified in the workshop. Otherwise, thanks everyone for participating, and thanks Harshik for having me. It was a great time.
Thank you again, Samuel, for agreeing to come on board with us and do this particular workshop. Thank you all the participants for joining in as well. It was great to have you all on board, and it was very detailed, the questions and the interactions as well. I'm pretty sure Sam would have enjoyed that too. With that, we bring this workshop to a close, and we do encourage that you join up for our further sessions as well. We're doing this to encourage more growth in the community, and we'll be glad to have you with us in the further sessions, one with Sam as well on the 12th. So please look forward to that too. I'm pretty sure you get a lot of information from Sam as is. So it's best that we can support this venture as well. Thank you again, Samuel. We'll just sort of wrap up then, and thank everybody else for joining in too. Have a good night, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're from, and see you again soon.
Thanks, Kaushik. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.